Sometimes wisdom is not wisdom. Sometimes it's ignorance wrapped up in wisdom paper. And even people who have good intentions might bring this to you. So let's talk about victimhood, victim consciousness, because it's not that there's no truth in this idea of victim consciousness. It's just that the way it's presented and even the words we used, victim, is is a distortion. First of all, there's two types of victimhood that, according to, well, as far as I am aware, from what I hear, there's two types of victimhood. One is not what they usually are talking about, and that one is manipulation. Okay, so it's like, I'm sorry for being such a bad friend, sarcastic. It's not, they're not really sorry. They're trying to make you feel bad for making them feel bad, right? Even though you're just being real with them. Or, there's a whole bunch of situations. But regardless, this is manipulative victimhood, and, that's a little bit more conscious. It's not something that is necessarily something you can't always, it's not something you can't help, at least not all the time. Or I'm feeling uncomfortable, but really, and that's not all the time. It's not necessarily just because they say that. It doesn't mean they're being manipulative, but they might say that because you're being real with them, and they don't feel comfortable because they have a distortion within them that makes them uncomfortable rather than what you're saying. But again, we can't apply this to every single situation. Exceptions do exist. We can't always know for sure if somebody's being manipulative or not. And we can use our intuition, and that's really important, but check your biases, because sometimes we have a certain experience that kind of overshadows that intuition. So, but then there's this victimhood that people usually talk about in the spiritual community, and that's what I would call maybe true constraint. This is about physical pain, mental emotional illness, and trauma, right? This is not chosen. It's ultimately due to a lack of knowledge of the solution to the problem. These people try very hard to improve their situation, and let it be known, though, that sometimes this is short term. Everybody deals with true constraints sometimes. But, well, I'll get into it. But it may be short term or long term. And there's two basic types of true constraint, and that's hard constraint and soft constraint. They're both constraints, they're both difficult. There's no denying either one of them, right? But this is where people can start to get toxic because, well, and this is where helpers or spiritual leaders become the victimizers, because their whole thing is that there's this energy of victimizer, and I'm not disputing that. Again, I do think it's the wrong wording, but that does exist. It's just that they want to paint with broad strokes, and it just doesn't fit every situation. In fact, it doesn't fit a lot of them. So what they actually mean by victim consciousness is this number two, true constraint, right? They have the privilege of only having dealt with soft constraint, or if they have a hard constraint, then it's not something that is extreme in their life. But this is distortion. They're like, I felt sad before, and it was hard, but I pulled myself through it. I've had physical pain before, but I got through it. I figured out a way, and good for them. Good for them. But that doesn't mean it's going to apply to everyone, because it's not that. There are certain things that you can't get through at all, but usually that's not the case. If it were, the human race wouldn't be as populous as we are. Like there is a certain amount of, or certain number of billions of years of evolution that has made sure of that. But unfortunately, that's not foolproof. So, but these people, many people don't face these hard constraints at all, at least not until they're very, very old. And because they've been hurt, they believe their experience is universal. They believe that they can paint with these broad strokes. And it's not always malicious, right? Sometimes it absolutely is. Sometimes it's willful ignorance, but it's not always malicious. But I will say it's laziness, because what it is a lack of ability to put yourself in other people's situations and ask yourself the question, why would somebody choose to suffer or to be in this situation long term? Nobody would do that if there wasn't a reason, if there wasn't a true constraint or a hard constraint preventing them from doing so, right? So, examples of hard constraints you can see are physical and obvious mental disabilities, obvious injuries, a serious life event. So, maybe it's not something you can see, but you know about it, and everybody understands that, right? Many people get through these with time. If you experience, if you get fired, if you get laid off, if you lose somebody in your life, if you have a breakup, people eventually do get through these oftentimes, but not every time. And often also, I put this later, diagnoses. Certain diagnoses are more well accepted as the cause of a true constraint of than others, right? And of course, if they're invisible or if they're not life threatening, so if you can't necessarily directly die from this illness, then people won't be as willing to understand these. And they will say, well, you can get through it. And again, maybe that's true that you can get through it, but what they're saying isn't helpful, and I'm going to explain why. So, no one can escape short term difficulties and constraints. That is something everybody deals with, and that's what they say. Well, everybody deals with this. A lot of people have had crappy childhoods, a lot of people have had this, and a lot of people have, but that doesn't mean that just because your friend has had had a bad childhood, just because now she's okay, doesn't mean that other people who had a bad childhood are the same. In fact, maybe her childhood was bad, but that doesn't mean it was anywhere near somebody else's. And it's not a competition. That's really important, because that's also kind of a toxic thing and not helpful either to make it a competition. That being said, people need to understand there's levels of suffering, and there's levels of difficulty, and there's levels of constraint. Also, I forgot to mention here, war, social unrest. Like, if you're in, my home country right now, and you're in a certain state starting with an M, you're going to be anxious, and that is normal. And to try to get around that by just being positive and not paying attention to the news is a distortion, and we're going to talk about that. So, examples of hard constraints you can't see: a lack of this. The main thing is this: a lack of understanding about the true solution. The typical wisdom does not work. So, being present and meditating and exercising and eating well doesn't work for everybody, and there's a reason for that. There's always a reason, because again, we've gone through these billions of years of evolution for a very good reason. I mean, from since we were like, a microbe to now. So, for example, dysbiosis, that is whenever you have some kind of um, uh, bad bacteria or yeast or something in your digestive system. This can be a life ruiner. This can ruin your physical and mental health, and it's hard to get a good solutions. Some people will get tested for it and they find a solution, but other people don't. And this is often caused by things, very simple things, such as antibiotics, antidepressants, which is interesting, but you can research that for yourself. But like, there's a lot of kinds of dysbiosis that we don't always test for. Doctors don't know it all, unfortunately, and so they can't diagnose everything, at least not at this point. So a lot of people, I mean, a vast majority of the people who are stuck right now are suffering with this. Whether they feel like they have digestive problems or not, it doesn't matter. Your digestive system makes 90% of your serotonin. And when you have dysbiosis, you cannot make the kind of serotonin that you need. And serotonin is not just in your brain, by the way. People with chronic pain probably have a problem with serotonin. And guess what? SSRIs and antidepressants will not help you in the long run. In fact, for some people, it's absolute poison, and it makes this absolutely worse if it's not already, if it's if it's already there. And if it's not already there, then it can make you have that. And dysbiosis causes autoimmunity, which, I mean, causes a whole plethora of problems, and you will never be able to see it on the outside. Maybe sometimes, but very rarely. In fact, my thing is, I truly believe a lot of people who are depressed, anxious, ADHD, and all of this stuff, this is the actual problem, and I would be willing to put down money, truly, on medical science catching up to this soon. I've heard some doctors talking about it, so I have hope with that. But it's very recent that I've started to hear about it from the mainstream medical community. Environmental toxins. Sometimes you live in a toxic place and you have no idea, genuinely, actually toxic physically. Sometimes, and in a spiritual sense, you might have ancestral curses and karma. These things are not things that you can just say, I don't allow this. Okay? You can say, I don't allow this, and disavow the disavow the curse, and dissolve the vow all you want. And if you don't do what is necessary to do to get through these curses and karma, you are not going to get through them. And the thing is, the way that society is set up is preventing us from solving any of this. And again, I'll come back to that. And then serious trauma. I mean, any trauma, really. There's so many traumas you have that are you don't even consider traumas. When they build up in your body, it makes this much more likely. Okay, and the more your immune system attacks you and your brain, your nervous system, and your muscles and your fascia, and that's another thing, fascial issues. Fascia is so important, but again, I really think that most of the time fascial issues are related to the dysbiosis. Anyway, so when they say you can't, when they, when they say they can't get better or don't know how, it's a cry for real help. It's not because they want to be a victim. Again, nobody wants to be a victim unless it's opportune for them in the moment. But long term, that's not useful for anybody except maybe a certain country. So if we were meant only to find answers exclusively within us, we wouldn't need oxygen or food. Everything is a symbol. We wouldn't be breathing in and out something that's external to nourish us. That we would be living in the spiritual world where we don't need any of that. Okay, there's a reason why we're in the physical world. We do need help from others, and that's just the case. I mean, I mean, it's very easy to find. It's very logical, and everything is mirror, as above, so below. Okay, so, but that being said, a lot of it does take place within us, and so here's my take on that. So instead of saying like victim consciousness, we could say difficulty finding coherence, lost, constrained, trying their best. And so what do you actually do? Okay, so everybody's solution is going to be a little different, okay? But if we can learn something very simple and practice it, then it will attract it to us. But I guarantee you, it's not the law of attraction in the way that we're taught it, okay? It's not just thinking positive. It just bothers me that that's a thing that we're still believing, because that is not how life works. Definitely don't simply label somebody a victim. Give them practical solutions if you know. Refer them to somebody if you know somebody else who might be able to give practical solutions. Telling them telling them they're in victim consciousness is not helping. So, when do answers come from within? First of all, if you are in a true constraint, a hard constraint, start learning to allow. This is not going to be an automatic thing. It's not going to take a month. It's not going to take a year even, maybe. It might take a year. But it might be short term, it might be long term, but what's important is that no matter what's going on inside of you physically, start learning to allow, and allow yourself to be in resistance. That is okay. Everything that you experience is okay. And that is where this toxic thing with the victimizer thing becomes toxic, is because, well, let me go here. For example, forced gratitude. They say to be grateful. That is very important. But forcing gratitude, forcing positive emotions, first of all, it doesn't work. It is contrary to what your body is telling you. Your body is giving you these signs for a reason. It's not just trying to torture you, okay? And so forcing these emotions is denial, it is resistance, it is distortion, it is invalidation. Okay, victim victimizer, this idea of it, um, and as all broad themes and energies are, is more complex than a lot of people really want to go into because it's inconvenient for them, right? So saying stop being a victimizer, stop being a victim is is actually part of this victim victimizer consciousness. That's what's so ironic about it, because when you tell somebody who is in a true hard constraint that you are just being a victim, you are invalidating their true suffering, which is psychologically proven to actually make things worse. It it makes them feel even less empowered. Your intention might be to make them more empowered, but that's not what's happening, okay? When people are stuck so much, this hurts. This makes things worse. This makes things we like any of us that have these or have had these, it makes them feel like there's something wrong with them, that they are like innately wrong, because, well, then why am I being such a victim? What about, like, how can I stop being a victim? And then everything they try doesn't work. It didn't When you say somebody's a victim, you're denying someone's present truth, which is also part of the whole spiritual narrative, which is a part of the positive aspects, where we have to allow everybody's individual truth. That is something we all understand. It is insulting because there obviously we know that when you say stop being such a victim, it is an insult. It reduces their ability to see their true self. And again, we are affected by other people's words, and especially when we're in something like this, we're especially sensitive to that. And it reduces the ability to allow. So we're creating more resistance in people when we say you're being a victim. Okay? So these spiritual lessons that people talk about are very real, they're very important, and all of this stuff. But these lessons are not going to be learned when you are in a constant state of dysregulation for one reason or another. And they're not going to be, not until your basic needs are achieved. Look up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Again, this is something psychologically like proven and researched, okay? The human vessel is not going to cooperate with a manipulative narrative. No matter how much you tell somebody who's in a true hard constraint that they are in victim consciousness, that is not a helpful thing, okay? Long-term mental anguish is a symptom. It's not it's not the cause, okay? So, and we can talk all day about thoughts and how thoughts become feelings, but guess what? Feelings become thoughts when your body is in pain. And sometimes that pain feels mental, sometimes it feels very obviously physical, sometimes it's both, oftentimes it's both. Then we can say that we're happy all day long. We can say that we're amazing and good and all day long, and our body is not going to change just because of that, at least not enough. What will help just a little bit is learning little by little to allow. But what's so good about allowing is not just that the benefits of the allowing itself on your body, but it's also allowing spirit to work through you. It allows your intuition to start picking up things little by little. Sometimes you're not going to see a change for a long time. But regardless, the more you practice, the closer you are to loosening those constraints. Some of those hard constraints are not going to be loosened by that. But when other constraints are loosened, that's when you are able to start to pick up the messages that you need from within or from the universe or whatever you want to say, in order to find the true solution that you need. So, for example, after a year and a half of doing this allowing and feeling just a tiny bit better, but not really significantly over time, I finally learned about this. And as soon as I started treating it as this, every single aspect of my life has started to get better. I'm still in it, but I can tell you right now that none of the times where I have felt stuck or I have been angry that I was treated a certain way and I didn't understand why I couldn't get through it, none of those times were going to be changed by somebody telling me that I was being a victim. What would have helped is to tell me about how to let go. People tell you how to let go, but they don't say, try allowing it. And again, that's a little bit more easier said than done, but there are things online, especially somatic meditations. Like, just you can look for allowing meditations, somatic meditations, and things like that that actually work with the state that you're in right now, rather than trying to, you know, make you accept something that you don't want to accept, like your these constraints, um, or trying to change your thoughts to something that isn't true. When you deny your reality, forget it. You're not gonna get that far. You might get somewhere, but you won't get as far as you will if you just allow yourself to think the thoughts that you're thinking and be aware of them and give yourself time, because it's not going to happen immediately. These constraints, the energetic ones, allowing will get rid eventually of those constraints, and then the physical constraints will start to come undone, because your intuition will tell you what to do, and it will come through other people and messages from the outside. But the one thing that is true about this, it comes from the inside, is you're the only one who's going to be able to say, aha, wow, that really is resonating with me, I'm going to try that. Because when you get that, it's not always going to be the case, because we're going to have wishful thinking sometimes, and that's just how it is, you know. But eventually you're going to stumble on the true, like, the true killer of the devil, you know, the true breaker of chains. And it, but you're not a victim. um and I don't mean that to say that you're believing you're a victim, obviously. I mean to say that you're not acting like a victim. You are a very powerful being stuck inside of a box that prevents your power from being used, even by you. So don't blame yourself. Don't blame others. Unless they're being manipulative, then go for it. And start trying to understand things from other people's perspective. Start trying to understand your own perspective. And start allowing.